Hey everyone, welcome to Jail Syntax and I'm your host Nisha and welcome to another video. And I know it's been a while since we last spoke and I am sorry about that, but life happens and I'm sure you can guess by my voice I'm not exactly keeping well. So the video filming for my book reviews has had to take a back seat, but I'm back here today to give you a couple of book reviews of the books that I read in the months of January and February 2024. Now I do want to preface this video by saying that I am a slow reader, so I certainly have not read 20-30 books till now. I've only been able to achieve a grand total of 7 books, but I'm happy about it. I'll just discuss with you which ones were my favorites and which ones just didn't make the cut. Now these books that I'm going to be talking about today are a combination of physical books, as you can see that the pile is right here, and there are also Kindle books and audiobooks. So with that said, why don't you grab yourself a cup of something or something to eat and just get cozy and let's dive right in. I began the year 2024 by completing my volume 4 of the Mahabharatha. Now, this book is something that I have reviewed previously in my channel and it's an extensive review. I will link it down below in case you haven't had a chance to see it. But this parva, we basically end this parva at the grounds of Kurukshetra. Duryodhana has refused to yield to the request of Yudhishthira and the war is imminent. There is no choice but for the cousins to battle it out. This book was really interesting because there were a lot of philosophical discussions that took place. We had a lot of micro myths coming in as various people tried to convince Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra to put a stop to the war, to the impending war, by narrating various myths from ancient times, and that is ancient to the Mahabharata itself, in order to convince them that conciliation and brotherly love is the solution and not war. But things don't pan out that way, and ultimately we find ourselves at the gates of Kurukshetra with the war about to begin. The second book that I completed in January was Beauty is a Wound, written by Eka Karniawan, an Indonesian author. I hope I pronounced this author's name correctly and I apologize if the pronunciation is wrong. Beauty is a Wound was a book that I listened to on Audible, and I took it up because the blurb of the book, the description of the book on Audible was really interesting. And the description basically spoke of how a woman called Devi Ayu comes back from the dead and how she starts to meddle in the lives of her 4 daughters who live in this small village in Indonesia. The book is supposed to be a satire and a social commentary on how colonizers treat the colonized. There is a relationship between the colonizers and the colonized. So here colonizers could be British, Dutch, French, Spain, Portuguese, Japanese, whoever is colonizing a particular country, their relationship with the colonized countries. And in order to express or explain and explore this particular concept and theme, Eka has really pulled out all the stops, I would say. There are a lot of trigger warnings that I have to give you. This book contains rape, it contains incest, it contains bestiality, and oh my god, the last second half of the book contains so much bestiality. It is appalling, and it is just, I just cannot wrap my head around the fact that why is there so much bestiality? I just do not get it. The book started out really well. The story of Devi Ayu's history is really interesting, and so is the story of her 4 daughters. But progressively, it just became super violent, unnecessarily so. There was a lot of references to sexual assault, but again, there was a glamorization to the sexual assault. It was as if, again, as you can see the title of the book, Beauty is a Wound, it seemed as if the message of the book was, beauty is a wound because beauty invites trouble. And again, if we connect this to the satire part, the commentary on the relationship between the colonizers and the colonized, it seems as if this is, like I said, a satirical remark of how the colonized countries were inviting trouble and inviting their colonization by displaying all of their resources and their wealth. Similarly, women in this particular book were inviting their rape, they were inviting their torture, were inviting their kidnapping and murder by being so beautiful and flaunting their beauty in front of those poor men. So while I can get the subtext, but the book has been written in a very I would say it would take a strong stomach and a strong mind to kind of set aside the really strong negative feelings that you would get when you start reading or listening to the sentences where the women are being blamed for being the victims of sexual assault. There is a particularly gruesome part in the book, and again, I'm so sorry for giving the spoilers, but I feel like I have to talk about this because not a lot of people talk about this particular scene in other reviews of this book, and I feel like if I don't talk about it, I'm not doing justice to this review. But there is a particular scene in this book where a woman is sexually assaulted by a bunch of people, and when she is saved, she suddenly, because of her sexual assault, she suddenly becomes very horny and starts having sex with her savior. I feel like this is so disgusting. Even if we think about the fact that, okay, Ika was trying to show that if a particular colonizer came and started divvying up a colonized country, and a third colonizer came in and saved the country from the hands of the first colonizer, then this colonized country would become the slave or become kind of enmeshed with the new colonizers coming in. But it kind of feels like I'm reaching too far and making too convoluted connections to justify this particular subtext or theme that the author wanted to achieve. Overall, I just felt like Beauty's Wound was just really overdone. Too many tropes, exceptionally offensive towards women, and the treatment of its female characters, and just the way sexual assault has been handled as a topic, making it seem glamorized and heroic as opposed to the trauma it is on the victim. This book was kind of, I had really high hopes for this book, and it completely slid down the ladder for me after I finished reading it. So I would recommend a word of caution before picking this book up. The third book that I finished in the month of January was Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. So this is something you might have seen in a lot of bookstagrams and booktubes. This cover is something unforgettable. I absolutely love this. It's one of my favorite covers that I have of books right now. So it's simple, it's plain, but it's like so eye-catching. I really love this cover. So this book is actually about a woman named Natsuki. This is actually set in Japan. And this author, you might be familiar because the same author wrote a book called Convenience Store Woman, which I intend to pick up in March. So this book is based in Japan, and it's about this girl called Natsuki and about her growing up years, and how as she's growing up, what happens to her in her childhood affects her intimate relationships with her spouse and with other people in her life. We also trace the life of Yu, her cousin, and about how their relationship starts out very innocent, just like any other cousin's relationships would, and then it sort of becomes, I think by our definition, toxic, because of the kind of nature of relationship that it takes shape. The second half of the book, we actually meet Natsuki's husband and the kind of throuple relationship that Natsuki, Yu, and Natsuki's husband kind of have. But also not in a conventional way. This relationship is a very deviant kind of a relationship. I'm not going to go into the specifics of it, because then that would kind of give away the spoilers for this book. But it's a very deviant kind of relationship, and it's about how they navigate the world with this relationship. So this book also has a lot of trigger warnings: incest, cannibalism, murder, and sexual assault. I think these are 4 major trigger warnings that I would give for this book. One of the things that I actually found interesting about this book is that so yes, it is creepy as you read it, and I'm not talking creepy in the sense of like horror movie creepy, very visceral creepy. It's not the visceral creepy kind. This is the kind of creepy that kind of sneaks up on you. It's the kind of creepy you feel where the hair on the back of your neck stand up. It's that kind of creepy. It slowly kind of bubbles and builds until it kind of explodes later in the very final pages of this book. One of the things that this book actually made me feel was it actually is a commentary on humans and our interaction with the world around us, and it's about that delicate balance that we play every day, that we kind of engage in every day, where we try to keep our sanity and toe the line societally in terms of societal expectations and rules, versus kind of just letting ourselves go and just giving into what we really want. It's a very fine line, it's a very fine balance. We kind of straddle those boundaries, and so many of us we force ourselves into these boxes because we want to fit in, we want to be part of society, we don't want to be ostracized, we don't want to become the other, but we all undergo similar kind of traumas, even if they take shape differently. Many of our traumas are very similar in nature, And what would happen if all of us just decide to just step outside of that box, to kind of break free from that mold? It kind of questions the very definition of society, and it kind of it questions the very definition of what it means to be humans. So I think that's why it kind of like the title Earthlings really fits in very well for me. It's a book that will definitely make you question your own morality and your own place in the world and your own behaviors. If certain things had been changed a little bit in your own lives. So yeah, definitely I would recommend pick up this book. It's very interesting. It's a very fast read. You can definitely finish this in a single day if you want to. The final book that I read in January and which kind of spilled over to the beginning of February was The Mad Sisters of Esi by Tashan Mehta. I just want you to just feast your eyes on this gorgeous cover. The light from my ring light is not really doing justice, but I hope you can see the kind of gilding, that work that is there here. It's just so gorgeous. The back cover is also really gorgeous, and I will talk about this because this is the only disappointing thing that I had with the book. So The Mad Sisters of Esi follows the lives of, I would say it kind of, it's a parallelly run story covering the lives of 5 different people. The first story is about 2 sisters, Myung and Lale, and the second story is of Magali, Vaisa and Jin. So this book is based in an alternative universe. You could call it magical realism because it does have realistic components to it, but it is based on in a completely parallel universe. This universe is called the Black Sea, and within the Black Sea is another parallel universe or a separate world, you could say, called the Vale of Babel. So Myung and Lale's story takes place primarily in the Vale of Babel, whereas Vaisa, Jin and Magali's story takes place in the Black Sea. So there is a very whimsical, there's very dreamy, ethereal quality to the writing. If you have heard of the author Italo Calvino and have read his works, it gets its inspiration for writing from this particular author, because Tashan Mehta really likes this author. So the writing style is a lot like Italo Calvino's writing. It is very dreamy. It has structure, it has shape, but you can barely feel it. So Myung and Lale's story starts in the Vale of Babel, where we explore, we kind of drop into Myung and Lale's lives and kind of pick up with them. And it's about what happens inside the Vale of Babel and the kind of consequences that it has on the Black Sea. Vaisa, Jin and Magali are actually from, not just from the Black Sea, which is outside of the world of the Vale of Babel, but they live thousands and thousands of years in the past prior to Myung and Lale. So we not only have 2 separate universes, but we have very different timelines. We go back really further back in time to once again drop right into the middle of Vaisa, Magali and Jin's story, and we explore how Vaisa, Magali and Jin's lives actually impact Myung and Lale. So ultimately at the end, both these storylines converge together and we find out what is the connection between these people. It was a roller coaster. I really enjoyed this book. I found myself sucked into this book, and the dreamy quality really held on. I kind of held my attention the entire way. This book is a story of worlds. It's a story of world building. It's a story of magic. It's a story of reclamation. It's a story of finding your place in the world. It's a story of sibling relationships, sisterly love, sibling rivalry. It's about kind of finding yourself in this vast universe, and with all these forces kind of acting upon you and kind of determining who you are, what is at your essence, what do you really want. And I think more than anything, as you finish reading this book, as you finish reading this really beautiful book, you really feel saddened by a very real thing that happens to all of us, which is, we have memories of things, of experiences and of people, of things that happened in the past, of being with someone. And when we experience something later on, or we meet that same person later on, that memory, that recollection does not reconcile with the reality of the current moment, of the present moment. And this book is as much about that. It's about relationships. It's about forging relationships, nurturing relationships. It's about finding your place in the universe, finding your kith and kin. It's about collecting those memories, preserving those memories. And then it's about allowing yourself the grace to acknowledge that, yes, I have this memory, but the reality of this person, the reality of this experience has changed completely because time has passed. because we've all matured, we've all changed. And it's about what happens when you can't reconcile with those changes, when reality is so jarring that you would much rather be steeped in the past rather than be in the present. One of the main reasons why I would love Indians to pick this up is because, we read Harry Potter, we read Twilight, we read Game of Thrones. So we read all of these fantasy books by foreign authors. We read a lot of science fiction books by foreign authors, but there are very few Indian authors or within fantasy, within science fiction, within all these genres. Then they're slowly coming up now. We haven't had access. At least I've been reading for decades, and I have not had access to those books in bookstores for quite a while. And now we're finally seeing authors of this genre in India who are Indian bred and born, where the flavor is Indian. So, for example, a lot of the flavors of the universe world building here is very much Indian. She uses a lot of Hindi terms, Urdu terms, so it's very Indian in its essence. So it feels really nice to kind of be part of this experience that is very Indian in nature. So I would definitely urge you to pick up this book. One thing that I do want to say is that there are certain sections in this book where the kind of punctuation marks such as asterisks and things like that are used, which are very faint. There are a lot of footnotes as well, which are barely visible. So I would say if physically reading is a bit challenging, I would suggest you pick this up on Kindle, or if it comes on Audible, pick it up on Audible. Secondly, the gilding, while gorgeous over here, if you read it enough, the gilding starts to kind of go away like this. So that's one thing that I'm really upset about, because I did pay quite a bit of money for this. So for this particular cover edition, so this is not really something that I'm happy about. But yeah, otherwise this book is a really lovely book. I would definitely urge you to pick it up. The next book that I read in the month of February was Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson. This again is a book that I listened to on Audible. Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson is again, it's a book that is based partly in the Caribbean, partly in the United Kingdom, and partly in the United States. It follows the life of Eleanor Bennett, a black woman in her, I think I would say late 60s, her son Byron and her daughter Benny, and their life in California. We also parallelly follow the lives of a group of teenagers called Covey, Bunny, and Gibbs living in the Caribbean. And again, this kind of goes back into the past, many decades into the past. We see these teenagers growing up in the Caribbean and their experiences in the Caribbean. And then we also parallelly see the experience of Eleanor Bennett and her children in the United States. And the book is about exploring the connections that our families have to our past. The book is about our relationship with our ancestry and our heritage, and finding joy and finding pride in our heritage and celebrating our heritage. Now, the term black cake, which is the title of the book, refers to an actual recipe that is made in the Caribbean even today. It's called the black cake, which is actually a sort of rum cake. Some people believe that it's an indigenous Caribbean recipe, while others believe that it was a colonial recipe which kind of was influenced by the colonizers who colonized the Caribbean at that time. While the history of this recipe is contested, so this book actually kind of traces its origin from this black cake. Eleanor Bennett, just before she dies, she's made this cake, she's kept it in the fridge, and then she leaves a set of tape recorded messages for Byron and Benny. And as Byron and Benny, and she tells them, you will know as you listen to my tapes when to actually eat this cake. And it's about how Byron and Benny actually start to learn about their heritage, learn about their ancestry, and as black kids who grew up in a predominantly white country. Yes, we know that America was actually belonging to the indigenous tribes, indigenous communities, but it was taken over and colonized by the white folks. And today too, there is a large percentage of white people who are in positions of power and who control American economy. And as a black person, as black children and as black adults now living in a white controlled and white owned America, you see in this book the kind of experiences that Byron and Benny have had, just trying to exist, just trying to live. The kind of challenges that come up to them as they try to thrive in this society that is not built for them, that is built off their backs but is set up against them. and we explore how they kind of dig into their heritage, and we make our connection back to the Caribbean, and we see what happened there, how things are connected to how things are now, and just about the immigrant experience. So this book is kind of touches upon various themes. It touches upon the black experience in a black country such as the Caribbean, of the black experience in a white country like the US and the UK, the experience of immigrants moving between nations. Interestingly, it also talks of the migrant experience of people of other races coming into black owned countries, and how people who are non-white, who are people of color but who are not of Caribbean descent, the kind of experiences they have coming into Caribbean countries and living with the black communities, and the kind of racial tensions that occur between them. So that part was actually really interesting to me. Overall, this was an easy listen. It was a feel good kind of a book in the end, because everything is sort of wrapped up in a nice little bow. I did feel this book was very busy in the sense that it tried to tackle a lot of themes. You get to see a lot of current themes in this book, where Shamin Wilkerson explores the black experience in the United States. We also, like I said, see the black experience in the United Kingdom and other European countries, and the black experience in a black country. And at its core is this recipe which speaks volumes about the heritage and ancestry of people hailing from the Caribbean, and how, even if you have immigrated somewhere else, you still have that nativeness in your blood, and you can kind of reclaim yourself and find yourself. Like I said, once again, this is about finding your place in the world, finding out who you are and what your strengths are, and how to champion yourself and empower yourself in a world that is set up against you. The next book that I read in February was actually a play, which is The Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. This particular copy is a student copy, and what I mean when I say student copy is that this book is designed to be read as a textbook for people studying English literature. The Doll's House is based in Norway, in the 1800s, and it follows the lives of Torvald, and who's a bank employee, and his wife Nora, and the kind of experience they have with their friends Dr. Rank, Mrs. Lind, and another person, a stranger called Krogstad. So this book was actually a revolutionary book when it came out initially, because it at its core, A Doll's House is about a woman defying the patriarchal expectations of women in a conservative society. So Nora is treated like a doll by her husband. She's given everything she could possibly want. She's pampered, she's petted, and she's initially very happy with her setup. But if you look closer, you see the Torvald exerts a phenomenal amount of control on Nora's every single minutest decisions, and sort of erases her identity completely. And initially Nora is not able to identify this happening to herself, that about her selfhood kind of being destroyed, her selfhood being erased. But then something happens, and Nora, who is very much in love with her husband, who's willing to sell her soul to the devil for him, to give up her life for him, her life kind of shatters. Her illusion of her husband and her relationship shatters, and she realizes that she has materially the things that she wants, but she has never really gained the respect and love of her husband. And this is really important to kind of differentiate, because you might have material things, but if you don't have those basic the respect and love of someone who treats you as an equal, who treats you as someone who matters, who treats you as someone whose opinion in their lives matters, then all this material wealth does not really matter in the end. We see Nora taking a particular decision that shatters the idyllic lifestyle that she's had, and the kind of repercussions that has on other people in their lives. We also meet Dr. Rank, who is a friend of Torvald, and Mrs. Lind, who's a friend of Nora, and Krogstad, who comes in, who is, I would say, an antagonist in this setting for Nora particularly. But again, I wouldn't be so cruel as to call Krogstad an antagonist, because once you read this book, you begin to wonder if the primary antagonist of this book was Torvald himself. A Doll's House is about how people are kind of set up to live in a particular way because they're controlled by other people. They make this person who's doing the controlling makes it seem like everything is fine, everything is idyllic, everything is happy and dandy. roses and rainbows and butterflies, but you scratch the surface and the ugliness starts to come out, right? You see that these relationships are based on only ego and pride and control, and not on love, respect, and, or I would say, mutual love and respect, and security and confidence in the relationship. So those things do not exist. So this book is actually about that. It is frivolous initially because Henri Gibson is trying to set up the narrative of what Nora's life looks like prior to this kind of realization that she has. In the second half of the play, things start to shift and we start seeing Nora kind of come into herself and question a lot of things that she had taken for granted or was told to take for granted because it was told by people in authority in her life. One of the things that I did find strange in the book was this very sudden transformation. While the transformation is essential for the success of this play, the transformation takes place too suddenly. When you are someone who is like Nora or in a place like Nora, you do wonder, does this transformation take place overnight like how it did with her? But then again, I don't want to be too judgmental with this because, you know, when people experience trauma, they react very differently. Some people might take time to kind of come to grips with what's happening to them, and then there is a lot of other considerations that they have to make before they take any decision. They might not even take any decision. But then others might be like Nora, who say, you know what, I'm not going to stand for this even for a single second, and who immediately kind of take that decision and move on, right? So this book really makes you kind of question society, patriarchal society, and the responses of women to relationship trauma and the attacks on their personhood and selfhood. The final book that I finished reading in February was Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung. This is another book that I'm sure you have heard of in book circles, on Bookstagram, Booktube. This is kind of trending right now, just like Earthlings was. Here I read it on Kindle, so this is the cover. Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung, translated from Korean by Anton Her. So Cursed Bunny is an anthology of stories by Bora Chung. It is, I would kind of peg this as magical realism / horror. Some of these books are, some of these stories in Cursed Bunny are the kind of visceral horror that you'd see in horror movies and horror shows. The others are more psychological horror, but at its core, it is conventional horror. So there are fantastical elements to it. There are strange creatures, there are ghosts, there are monsters that are kind of overlaid on that human life and human element. I actually picked up this book because it was so famous on Bookstagram and Booktube, and I was really, and I'm someone who loves seeing horror shows and horror movies, and I was interested in reading a book that was so famous for being so creepy that you couldn't sit through it. It was so difficult to read because it was so disturbing. Those were the kind of descriptors that I saw online for Cursed Bunny, so I was really excited to pick this up. And as I started reading, there are a couple of stories that were nicely written. But as I kind of progressed through the stories, I think there are about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 stories. As I finished reading story 4, story 5, everything sort of started becoming like bleh. The reason I say this is because again, I don't know if it's because my weirdness meter is very high or my tolerance level for creepy things is very high because I watch a lot of horror shows and movies, or perhaps the translation doesn't do justice to the book. I have no idea. I have never read Anton Hurst's translations before. So for whatever reason, the book just did not connect with me. The stories, while they started out good with a lot of promise, they fell back on conventional tropes that you find in horror and fantasy. And if you have consumed sufficient horror material, whether in the form of books or podcasts or TV, you will be familiar with how the stories would kind of take shape later on, because these are very conventional storylines that you would find if you consume horror and fantasy content regularly. I found myself kind of predicting already what would happen. That kind of took away some of the joy of reading. But if you're someone who doesn't really consume this kind of content much, then I think you would definitely be creeped out and find this really novel. In saying that, there are a couple of stories that did stand out. For example, the very first story, The Embodiment, was a very novel idea. I really liked that particular story. Another story called Goodbye My Love is something that I again really enjoyed. Because it kind of focuses on the relationship between humans and technology. And because I enjoyed that book, I am not dismissing Bora Chung immediately, and rather I would want to pursue her new book, Your Utopia, because Your Utopia is also about humans' relationship with technology and how technology affects the world. So I am interested in picking that book up. So when I do, I will let you know whether Your Utopia is better than Cursed Bunny or not. That brings us to the end of this list. All right, thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Bye bye.